My career ended in a heartbeat when our newly appointed chief executive officer sneered across a white linen tablecloth and told me to get out of the room. He thought I was nothing more than an overpaid human dictionary, an elderly staffer who could be swept aside like breadcrumbs. He had no idea that the entire $7,500,000,000 deal rested on a silent legal foundation that bore my personal signature. My name is Lyle Miller. I am 54 years old, and for 18 years I served as the Senior Director of Global Partnerships at Nexus Tech Systems. Over nearly 2 decades of grueling international travel, I built the cross-border bridge connecting our firm with Takahashi Heavy Industries, the legendary East Asian conglomerate that controls 55% of the global maritime logistics matrix. I learned the language, mastered the unspoken etiquette, and spent hundreds of evenings cultivating genuine trust with their 73-year-old chairman, Mr. Kenzo Tanaka. In high-stakes international business, trust is built over decades of meticulous respect, yet a fool can shatter it in 30 seconds. The incident occurred at 8:15 in the evening on a chilly Tuesday in the private dining salon at Le Cirque in Manhattan. The air smelled of aged oak paneling, seared Wagyu beef, and mounting tension. I sat to the left of the empty master chair at the head of the table. Across from me sat Mr. Kenzo Tanaka, flanked by 7 senior vice presidents from Tokyo. Mr. Tanaka sat with immaculate posture, his hands resting lightly on his lap, but I recognized the subtle tightening around his eyes. We were 25 minutes past the scheduled dinner start time. In traditional business culture, arriving late without notification is not merely poor planning. It is a calculated declaration of disrespect. Mr. Tanaka leaned forward slightly and spoke in soft, measured tones. He observed that perhaps traffic in Midtown Manhattan was unusually severe this evening. I bowed my head with quiet grace, keeping my eyes fixed on his calm face. I offered a humble apology on behalf of our firm, explaining that our leadership was finalizing critical preparations to ensure the utmost honor for our honored guests. In truth, I knew precisely why our new chief executive officer was late. 5 minutes earlier, Sonia Reynolds, our head of human resources, had sent me a frantic text message confirming that 41-year-old Brandon Hellinger was still standing in the building lobby, finishing a personal phone call regarding his private golf club membership. At 8:40 in the evening, the heavy mahogany doors burst open. Brandon Hellinger strutted into the room like a conqueror entering a defeated village. He wore a custom 3-piece Italian suit that cost more than my first home, but he wore it with loud, restless swagger. He made no bow, offered no soft-spoken greeting, and took no note of the formal seating arrangements. Instead, he tossed his leather briefcase onto a side table, pulled out the high-backed master armchair with an abrasive scrape against the parquet floor, and sat down with a heavy thud. Brandon bellowed out a hearty greeting, declaring that business in New York was a brutal sport and that he had just spent 30 minutes grinding down a software vendor who tried to gouge our margins. He laughed loudly at his own remark, oblivious to the icy stillness that settled over the table. The 7 Japanese executives sat motionless, their eyes fixed on their plates. Mr. Tanaka did not blink. He turned his gaze slowly toward me. I gave him a microscopic nod, signaling that I would soften the sharp edges of this brash entry. I shifted immediately into fluent formal Japanese, addressing Mr. Tanaka with the highest level of diplomatic honor. I conveyed that Mr. Hellinger expressed his profound gratitude for their patience and was eager to solidify a partnership that would bring prosperity to both organizations for generations to come. But before I could finish the phrase, Brandon slammed his palm onto the table, rattling the crystal water goblets. Brandon barked at me to stop softening his tone. He declared in a sharp voice that he did not hire an executive to act as a babysitter or a diplomat. He wanted the clients to know they were dealing with a ruthless predator who demanded maximum yield, not a timid kitten. He then snapped his fingers at the waiter, demanding the most expensive 18-year-old scotch in the house before the appetizers had even been served. I closed my eyes for a fleeting second, feeling a cold knot of dread form in my stomach. Protocol dictated that hard spirits were never ordered prior to the host, offering a formal toast with traditional rice wine. Brandon was dismantling 3 years of delicate negotiation in less than 10 minutes. I leaned toward him and whispered softly, reminding him that Mr. Tanaka abstained from hard liquor before dinner and that pushing aggressive demands before establishing personal rapport was considered offensive. Brandon turned his head, staring at me with condescending amusement. He told me to keep my advice to myself. He claimed he had skimmed the executive summary on Asian negotiation tactics during his short flight from Miami and knew exactly how to close a deal. He ordered me to stick to verbatim translation and stop lecturing him on corporate manners. By 9:10 in the evening, as the waiter served a delicate salmon platter, Brandon pushed his food around with a silver fork, like it was cheap cafeteria fare. He leaned across the table, picked his teeth with a wooden toothpick, and demanded to talk hard numbers. He stated that while $7,500,000,000 sounded impressive on paper, his analysis of Takahashi Heavy Industries revealed at least 15% in operational waste. He suggested that Mr. Tanaka should immediately terminate their legacy workforce, referring to long-tenured employees as useless dead weight that needed to be pruned. I froze in absolute horror. In Japanese enterprise, lifetime employment was a sacred pact of mutual loyalty. Calling 30-year veterans dead weight was an insult aimed directly at Mr. Tanaka's core values. I attempted to reframe the statement in Japanese, saying that our technology would enhance the productivity of their valued long-term staff. But Mr. Tanaka held up a hand. He noted in quiet, impeccable English that he understood enough vocabulary to catch the phrase dead weight. Brandon laughed loudly, slamming his fork onto his plate with a sharp ring. He demanded that Mr. Tanaka sign the $7,500,000,000 contract immediately before dessert arrived, boasting that he had a private jet waiting to fly him to Cabo in the morning. I intervened quietly, explaining that demanding an immediate signature over dinner was improper and signaled a total lack of trust. Brandon stood up so violently that his chair tipped backward onto the floor. He pointed a finger at my chest and shouted that he had endured enough of my insubordination. He barked that I was nothing more than a glorified dictionary, a 54-year-old relic who thought 18 years of tenure gave me authority. He turned to Mr. Tanaka and declared that he was making an executive decision to fire me on the spot, ordering me to pack my desk immediately. I felt the color drain from my face. I did not raise my voice. I looked Brandon in the eye, adjusted my suit jacket, and offered a deep 90-degree bow of apology to Mr. Tanaka and his delegation. I expressed my deepest regret in formal Japanese, turned on my heel, and walked toward the exit. But before my hand touched the brass door handle, I heard the synchronized scraping of 8 chairs behind me. The entire Japanese delegations stood up in total silence, picked up their leather portfolios, and walked out right behind me, leaving Brandon standing alone in the center of a ruined room. The morning air of Manhattan felt heavy with damp mist as I walked toward the headquarters of Nexus Tech Systems at 7:30 in the morning as the sun rose. When I tapped my electronic access badge against the security turnstile, the LED indicator flashed crimson and emitted a sharp denial chime. My clearance had been revoked overnight. Brandon Hellinger was not content with terminating my contract. He wanted to purge my presence from the corporate registry before the market opened. Donnie Becker, a veteran security officer who had greeted me every morning for a decade, stepped out from behind the marble desk. He kept his eyes lowered, muttering softly that he was bound by strict executive orders from the 41st floor. He informed me that I was barred from entering the elevator bank and that human resources had been instructed to bring my personal belongings down to the lobby. I smiled gently and assured Donnie that I understood he was merely doing his job. Moments later, the high-speed elevator chimed, and 46-year-old Sonia Reynolds stepped out carrying a single cardboard storage box. Her face was flushed with anger, her jaw set in a tight line. She handed me the box, which contained a framed photograph of my family, a small desk plant, and an 18-year longevity plaque. Sonia leaned in close and whispered that Brandon had been screaming at the legal department since 6 in the morning, crafting a completely fabricated narrative for the board of directors. She revealed that Brandon was claiming I had arrived at the dinner in an intoxicated state, insulted the clients, and deliberately sabotaged the $7,500,000,000 transaction. Sonia discreetly slipped a folded paper into my jacket pocket, warning me not to open it until I was clear of the security cameras. I thanked her for her courage, took my box, and stepped out into the rain. Sitting in the back of a yellow taxicab, I unfolded the paper. It was a printed copy of an emergency email sent by Brandon to his personal legal counsel at midnight. In the message, Brandon explicitly instructed his attorney to construct a false paper trail alleging financial misconduct and mental instability against me to shield himself from board scrutiny. I instructed the driver to take me to the garment district, stopping in front of an unassuming brick building above a commercial bakery. I carried my box up 3 flights of narrow stairs to the office of Felix Thorne, a 48-year-old forensic data specialist and former cyber intelligence analyst. Felix opened the door wearing his customary oversized hoodie. Surrounded by a glowing fortress of dual-monitor workstations and humming server racks, Felix gestured for me to sit down on a leather sofa while he pulled up the live market tickers for Nexus Tech Systems. The stock had already begun to slide in pre-market trading, dropping 6% as rumors of a failed Asian expansion began to circulate among institutional traders. I explained the events of the previous evening and showed him the leaked email provided by Sonia. Felix scanned the document, his eyes narrowing behind his glasses as he muttered that Brandon was attempting a textbook corporate execution. Felix insisted that defending myself against defamation required empirical leverage rather than emotional appeals. He made a secure encrypted call to Gavin Pratt, an IT infrastructure specialist at Nexus Tech Systems whom I had mentored 10 years. Gavin agreed to provide Felix with temporary read-only access to the internal executive mail servers, allowing us to inspect the raw server logs surrounding Brandon's communication. Within 20 minutes of searching through encrypted traffic, Felix uncovered a massive anomaly. Brandon had not merely mishandled the dinner out of arrogance. He had executed a calculated financial scheme. 2 weeks prior to the dinner, an offshore shell entity registered in Nevis, called Apex Capital Ventures, had established an aggressive short position against Nexus Tech Systems stock, betting tens of millions of dollars that the company's valuation would plummet within 48 hours. Felix traced the digital footprint of the Nevis shell account directly back to a static Internet Protocol address located inside Brandon's private office suite at corporate headquarters. Brandon had intentionally engineered a temporary crisis to drive down the stock price by 20 or 30%, intending to buy back shares at a massive discount before quietly repairing the deal with Mr. Tanaka later in the week. He was gambling with the retirement accounts of 2,000 employees to pocket a legal windfall of $12 million. My phone buzzed on the desk with an incoming audio file from Sonia. She had discreetly recorded Brandon's emergency all-hands staff address at 8:30 in the morning. We played the recording through Felix's studio monitors. Brandon's voice filled the room, falsely declaring to the entire staff that my erratic behavior and unprofessional conduct had forced him to relieve me of my duties to protect the firm's reputation. Hearing his brazen lies reinforced a quiet, unwavering resolve within my chest. Felix turned in his swivel chair and stared at me with an intense expression. He pointed out that while insider trading and defamation were serious offenses, regulatory investigations could take 18 months to yield results. He asked if there was an immediate legal operational weapon embedded within the original enterprise architecture that could halt Brandon's narrative before the board of directors convened that evening. I sat back, reflecting on the historical structure of our international operations. In 2011, when Nexus Tech Systems first attempted to integrate its proprietary AI logistics translation matrix, known as the Kuroshio engine, into East Asian maritime networks, international trade regulations required a certified cultural guarantor. I realized with such clarity that the master software license was not owned outright by the corporate entity. It was legally registered under a specialized personal covenant. I asked Felix to pull up the original master enterprise agreement signed in 2011 between Nexus Tech Systems and Takahashi Heavy Industries. He executed a deep search through the archived legal registries in Tokyo and retrieved the 90-page document. We zoomed in on Section 14, Clause B, which governed intellectual property compliance under Title 35 of the United States Code, Section 271, and international commercial treaties. The language of the clause was explicit and unyielding. It stated that the exclusive license to operate the Kuroshio AI logistics engine within global maritime networks was legally granted to Nexus Tech Systems solely under the active personal guarantee of Lyle Miller as the designated cultural guarantor. Paragraph 4 explicitly stipulated that, should the employment of the cultural guarantor be terminated, for any reason, the master license would immediately experience an automatic revocation by operation of law, rendering any continued execution of the source code an act of willful patent infringement and international copyright theft, international copyright under Title 17 of the United States Code Section 106. Felix burst into a wide grin as he read the fine print aloud. He pointed out that Brandon Hellinger had not simply fired an executive director, he had unwittingly revoked the company's core operating license. As of 9 o'clock that morning, every server running the Kuroshio algorithm across 90 North American shipping terminals was operating illegally. Without wasting another moment, I dialed the private direct line of Mr. Kenzo Tanaka in Tokyo. He answered on the very first chime. His voice was serene and unhurried. He addressed me warmly, stating that he had been anticipating my call. I inquired whether he recalled the specific terms of the cultural guarantor clause we had drafted together 14 years ago. A low, resonant chuckle echoed through the speaker. Mr. Tanaka revealed that he had personally insisted on inserting that exact clause into the 2011 contract. He explained that long ago, his father had taught him that corporate executives were transient figures who shifted with the seasons, whereas men of honor were rare anchor points. He had engineered the clause specifically to ensure that if a day ever arrived when profit-driven raiders attempted to cast me aside, the technology itself would refuse to serve them. Mr. Tanaka informed me that his legal counsel in Tokyo was already preparing to file a formal notice of immediate license revocation with the Tokyo Stock Exchange, the Federal Communications Commission, and the United States Patent and Trademark Office. He asked if I was prepared for the inevitable shockwaves that would follow such a declaration. I replied with quiet conviction that honor demanded the truth be laid bare. At 11:15 in the morning, Tokyo Heavy Industries released a brief, formal press statement. The announcement stated that, due to a material breach of the personal guarantor condition established in the 2011 Master Agreement, all intellectual property licenses granted to Nexus Tech Systems were officially revoked effective immediately. The release advised all maritime logistics partners that continued operation of the Kuroshio platform was unauthorized. The financial impact was instantaneous and devastating. The stock ticker for Nexus Tech Systems froze briefly as an unprecedented volume of sell orders hit the exchange floor. When trading resumed, the stock did not merely decline, it plunged off a cliff. Within 45 minutes, the share price crashed by 28%, then 35%, finally bottoming out at a staggering 42% loss in valuation. Major news networks interrupted their midday financial broadcasts to report on the unprecedented collapse. On-screen analysts pointed out that Nexus Tech Systems had lost over $3 billion in market capitalization in less than 3 hours following reports that their flagship logistics software had been rendered legally useless due to an executive blunder by new chief executive Brandon Hellinger. Inside Felix's office, my phone began ringing incessantly. The screen displayed dozens of missed calls from executive board members, corporate vice presidents, and senior partners. At 12:40 in the afternoon, the phone chimed with an incoming call from Brandon Hellinger's personal mobile number. Felix instructed me to let it ring 6 times before answering, allowing Brandon to stew in his mounting desperation. When I finally pressed the answer button, Brandon's voice erupted through the receiver in a high-pitched, hysterical panic. He screamed into the phone, demanding to know what malicious virus I had uploaded into the main mainframe to lock their regional servers. I replied calmly that no virus had been planted, explaining that the system locking was simply the natural legal consequence of his decision to terminate the master license holder. Brandon stammered incoherently. his arrogant bravado crumbling into desperate bargaining. He offered to reinstate my position immediately, promising to double my annual compensation to $750,000, then raising it to $1,500,000 with guaranteed stock grants if I would immediately sign an emergency waiver to reactivate the server network before the market closed. I listened quietly to his frantic pleas before replying in a measured tone. I informed Brandon that respect, integrity, and 18 years of dedicated service could not be bought back with an emergency check. I stated clearly that he lacked the moral character required to lead the enterprise and that I would not assist him in deceiving the shareholders any longer. Brandon's desperation instantly mutated into venomous rage. He snarled through the phone that he possessed a team of high-priced corporate attorneys who would fabricate embezzlement charges against me and ruin my personal reputation forever if I did not comply. I replied that he was free to pursue whatever legal avenues he chose, but reminded him that the truth had a habit of outlasting lies. I then disconnected the line, leaving Brandon shouting into an empty connection. At 2:30 in the afternoon, a motorcycle courier arrived at the entrance of the bakery building below Felix's office and delivered a thick courier envelope under the door. Inside was a formal cease and desist letter drafted by a top Manhattan litigation firm. The document accused me of corporate sabotage, trade secret theft, and intentional interference with contractual relations, threatening immediate civil litigation and criminal referral, unless I surrendered all administrative credentials by 5 o'clock that afternoon. Felix reviewed the legal filing with a dry laugh, pointing out that Brandon was engaging in a desperate game of brinkmanship. The threat was designed to intimidate me into signing a settlement agreement before the emergency board of directors meeting convened at 8 o'clock in the evening at corporate headquarters. Brandon needed to present a signed waiver to Chairman Sanford Cross to prove that he had resolved the crisis and contained the rogue executive. Felix turned his chair toward his primary workstation and opened the forensic folder containing the server logs from Brandon's office. He highlighted the direct digital evidence tying the short-selling transactions executed by Apex Capital Ventures in Nevis to Brandon's personal workstation IP address. Furthermore, Felix had compiled the precise time-stamped records showing that Brandon had initiated those short orders during working hours while claiming to prepare for the Japanese delegation dinner. I realized that submitting this evidence via email would allow Brandon's inner circle to intercept the message or claim that the data was fabricated by a disgruntled former staffer. The only way to ensure absolute accountability was to present the empirical evidence in person directly to the board of directors during their emergency evening session. At 7:40 in the evening, Felix and I arrived at the Marble Plaza outside Nexus Tech Systems headquarters. The 70-story skyscraper loomed against the dark night sky, its upper floors illuminated where executive teams were working in complete panic. I carried a metal briefcase containing the original 2011 Master Enterprise Agreement, the personal guarantor documentation, and a secure USB drive loaded with the forensic insider trading logs. We approached the security turnstiles in the main lobby. Donnie Becker saw us walking across the marble floor and immediately recognized the gravity of the moment. Two newly hired private security guards stepped forward to intercept us, but Donnie tapped the manual override control beneath his desk, swinging the optical turnstile open. He looked me in the eye and whispered that he was taking a stand for every honest employee in the building, wishing me strength before turning back to his monitors. Felix and I stepped into the Executive Express elevator, pressing the button for the 70th floor. As the elevator ascended smoothly through the shaft, I adjusted my silk tie and focused my mind. 18 years of quiet dedication had led to this single moment. This was no longer merely a struggle over corporate governance. It was a stand for dignity, truth, and the fundamental value of human honor over unchecked arrogance. The elevator doors parted at 7:58 in the evening, opening into the plush carpeted foyer outside the main boardroom. The muffled sound of heated arguments echoed down the corridor. Chairman Sanford Cross was shouting at the top of his lungs, demanding to know how $3 billion in equity had evaporated in a single afternoon. Brandon's voice was shrill and strained as he desperately claimed that a rogue former director had hacked the infrastructure. Without knocking, I pushed open the heavy double oak doors and stepped into the boardroom. 12 members of the board of directors were seated around a 40-foot conference table, their faces pale and exhausted. Brandon Hellinger stood at the head of the table, his shirt unbuttoned at the collar, his forehead dripping with sweat as he gestured wildly at a projection screen. The room fell instantly silent as all 12 board members turned to look at me. Brandon froze mid-sentence, his eye widening in sheer disbelief and panic. He pointed a shaking finger toward the door and shrieked for security to enter the room immediately, accusing me of trespassing and criminal espionage. I walked steadily toward the empty chair at the foot of the table, the seat reserved for the Senior Director of Global Partnerships. I placed my metal briefcase onto the polished mahogany surface with a firm, deliberate thud. I looked directly at 71-year-old Chairman Sanford Cross and stated in a clear, resonant voice that I had not entered the room to bargain or sabotage, but to present the undisputed facts of why the company stood on the brink of total ruin. Chairman Sanford Cross held up a hand, silencing Brandon's hysterical outbursts. He looked at me with stern, analytical eyes and granted me 5 minutes to present my account before he summoned federal authorities. I opened the briefcase, retrieved the original 2011 Enterprise Agreement, and slid the document down the long table directly into the hands of the chairman. I explained in precise detail that the Kuroshio AI engine was not an unencumbered corporate asset, but an intellectual property structure bound by Title 35 of the United States Code, Section 271, under my active personal guarantee. I revealed that when Brandon arrogantly terminated my employment over dinner to cover up his own incompetence, he had triggered an automatic, irrevocable license termination under federal law. Chairman Sanford Cross put on his reading glasses and scanned the highlighted clauses of Section 14. His face paled as he read the explicit legal terms. He turned his head slowly toward Brandon, his voice trembling with quiet fury as he asked if the chief executive officer had failed to inspect the foundational operating agreements of the firm before executing an executive firing. Brandon stammered incoherently, claiming that legacy paperwork from 14 years ago was irrelevant in a modern enterprise. I stepped forward and plugged the secure USB drive into the conference table media interface. The large, high-definition displays surrounding the boardroom instantly shifted from Brandon's generic presentation slides to a detailed forensic accounting ledger. The screens displayed the complete transaction history of Apex Capital Ventures in Nevis, showing the massive short position established against Nexus Tech Systems stock. I directed the board's attention to the embedded digital telemetry, pointing out that the short-selling orders had been executed directly from Brandon's private office, workstation IP address, at 4 o'clock the previous afternoon. I explained that Brandon had deliberately engineered a confrontation during the dinner with Mr. Kenzo Tanaka to force a temporary sharp drop in valuation, intending to profit millions through his offshore account before attempting to renegotiate the deal later. A collective gasp echoed across the boardroom as the 12 directors stared at the unmistakable evidence of insider trading and breach of fiduciary duty under Title 15 of the United States Code Section 78JB and SEC Rule 10b-5. Chairman Sanford Cross stood up slowly, his face flushed with righteous indignation. He looked at Brandon not merely with anger, but with absolute disgust. Chairman Sanford Cross immediately picked up the internal security phone on the wall and ordered senior facility guards to enter the boardroom. Within seconds, Donnie Becker and 2 senior officers stepped into the room. Sanford Cross pointed at Brandon Hellinger and declared that the chief executive officer was terminated effective immediately for cause, stripping him of all golden parachute severance packages and corporate indemnification rights. Brandon attempted to protest, shouting that he possessed contractual rights and executive authority. But Donnie Becker placed a firm hand on Brandon's shoulder, guiding him away from the executive table. As Brandon was escorted toward the door, his eyes met mine. The arrogant swagger that had defined him was completely gone, replaced by the hollow realization of total ruin. He had sought to destroy an 18-year career to satisfy his own greed, only to dismantle his own future in the process. Following Brandon's removal, Chairman Sanford Cross sat down with me and the board to address the operational crisis. I informed the board that I would not accept a simple reinstatement as an employee under the previous structure, as corporate bureaucracy had proven vulnerable to reckless interference. Instead, I proposed a structural reorganization that would permanently safeguard the technology and honor our international partners. Over the next 14 days, Nexus Tech Systems executed a complete corporate restructuring. The firm spun off its international relations and logistics integration department into an independent entity titled Vance Global Consulting, fully owned and operated by me. Under the new legal framework, Vance Global Consulting became the exclusive master licensor of the Kuroshio AI engine, leasing the operational interface back to Nexus Tech Systems under strict compliance guidelines. I was no longer an employee on their payroll. I was their independent technology licensor. 2 weeks after the board meeting, I sat on a quiet wooden veranda overlooking a serene stone garden and koi pond at a private estate outside Kyoto, Japan. The morning air was crisp, carrying the soft scent of pine needles and fresh green tea. Across from me sat 73-year-old Mr. Kenzo Tanaka, pouring warm tea into small ceramic cups with deliberate, fluid grace. Mr. Tanaka passed a cup to me with both hands. He observed with a gentle smile that the financial markets had stabilized and that our new enterprise framework ensured long-term honor for both organizations. He remarked that arrogance was a heavy burden that fools insisted on carrying until it crushed them, whereas patience and integrity were light garments that endured all seasons. We raised our ceramic cups and toasted to enduring partnership and mutual respect. Looking out across the quiet waters of the koi pond, I reflected deeply on the 18-year journey that had brought me to this moment. I thought about the long nights, the endless flights, the quiet sacrifices, and the moment when Donnie Becker opened the security turnstile for me in the lobby. I realized that true strength in life and business does not stem from loud titles, expensive suits, or corporate authority. True strength resides in the quiet mastery of your craft, the integrity of your word, and the genuine relationships you build with the people around you every single day. For every professional who feels invisible, undervalued, or pushed aside by arrogant corporate leadership, remember this fundamental truth. Never confuse your title with your value. Your title is merely a temporary label assigned by others. Your true value is the indispensable wisdom, skill, and integrity you leave behind. Build yourself into an unshakable bridge. Master the intricate details that others are too proud to learn. Treat the security guards, the administrative assistants, and the junior technicians with the exact same profound respect you offer to board chairmen. And above all, maintain your legal records and honor your principles. For when the day comes that arrogance attempts to erase your contribution, you will possess the standing to look them in the eye and prove that you are not disposable. You are the key